The ink on the ceasefire agreement was not even dry when the radars across the Middle East turned a violent, screaming red. 120 minutes. That was the lifespan of the latest diplomatic illusion. While the world's cameras were still focused on the podiums of peace, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was already inputting the final coordinates for a strategic gamble that has no precedent in modern history. This was not a mere skirmish. This was not the usual shadow war played out through proxies in the tunnels of Gaza or the hills of South Lebanon. This was a direct, kinetic challenge to the existing global order by launching a nonstop barrage of ballistic missiles not only at Tel Aviv, but at Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Tehran has effectively declared war on the geography of American influence. They did not just break a treaty. They attempted to break the spine of the regional security architecture. In the cold logic of great power realism, peace is never a moral state. It is a function of the balance of power. When that balance shifts or is perceived to shift, violence is the inevitable correction. For months, the narrative of escalation was used as a cage to restrain American and Israeli hard power. Diplomacy was sold as a solution, but to the realist eye, it was merely a strategic pause that one side used to reload. Donald Trump held back the hammer. He gave the diplomats their window. He offered the Iranian regime an exit ramp through sheer strength and the threat of total economic strangulation. But the regime in Tehran misread this restraint. They saw the window of diplomacy not as a chance for survival, but as a gap in the armor. They mistook a tactical pause for a strategic retreat. Now, the missiles raining down on the civilian centers of Israel and the energy hubs of the Gulf have stripped away the last remnants of the diplomatic mask. The scale of this attack reveals a desperate but calculated logic of escalation. By targeting the Gulf Cooperation Council states Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain, Tehran is attempting to decouple these nations from the American security umbrella. This is a direct assault on the logistics of the United States military. Bahrain is the home of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Qatar hosts the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest American military installation in the Middle East. Kuwait is the primary logistical gateway for U.S. Army Central. By turning these sovereign nations into targets, Iran is signaling that no square inch of the region is off limits if the U.S. maintains its posture. They are trying to create a cost so high that the Gulf monarchies will beg for a neutral status, effectively evicting American hard power from the region. But this is where the Iranian calculus fails the test of realist physics. War is a game of depth, and Tehran has just shortened its own. By attacking everyone at once, they have achieved the one thing decades of diplomacy could not. They have unified the hardware of the region against them. In the minutes following the first launches, the integrated air defense systems of the Middle East began to hum. This is where the American advantage becomes undeniable. The United States does not just provide missiles. It provides the digital glue that binds the region's sensors together. Link, 1-6 data networks, Aegis ashore, and the sheer processing power of American ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance create a transparent battlefield. Iran is firing into a sky that is owned by American and Israeli sensors. Every launch is a data point. Every trajectory is a solved equation before the missile even reaches its apogee. Let us look at the map of power. Iran is a fortress state, but it is a fortress under siege. Its strength lies in its mountainous terrain and its massive, though aging, arsenal of short and medium-range missiles. However, its weakness is its lack of strategic depth in the face of a maritime and aerospace superpower. The United States operates on a global scale. The Ford-class carrier strike groups currently repositioning in the Eastern Mediterranean and the North Arabian Sea do not just represent firepower. They represent the ability to sustain a high-intensity conflict indefinitely. Iran's logistics are localized and vulnerable to interdiction. Once the American and Israeli air campaigns begin in earnest, the Iranian ability to reload their silos will be measured in hours, while the American ability to deliver ordnance will be measured in weeks and months. The logic of escalation now dictates a massive shift in the theater of operations. We are no longer talking about tit-for-tat strikes. We are looking at the systematic dismantling of Iran's kinetic infrastructure. The Iranian regime has bet that the world's fear of a global oil price spike would act as a shield. By attacking the UAE and Bahrain, they are trying to hold the global economy hostage. But they have forgotten that a superpower's primary interest is the maintenance of the sea lanes. The moment the first missile struck near a port in the UAE, the mission for the U.S. Navy shifted from deterrence to enforcement. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer a diplomatic bargaining chip. It is now a tactical bottleneck that the United States is prepared to clear by force. Consider the industrial military capacity. This is the heart of realist war. Iran can produce thousands of drones and hundreds of missiles, but they cannot replace their high-end air defense systems or their command and control hubs once they are leveled. The United States and its allies possess an industrial depth that Tehran cannot match. The B-2 Spirit bombers, which have already been signaled as active, can strike from across the globe with impunity, penetrating the most hardened Iranian sites. This is the ultimate expression of hard power, the ability to reach out and destroy the enemy's most precious assets without ever being seen on a radar screen. The Iranian regime is playing with matches in a room full of gasoline, while the United States is standing outside with a fire hose and a sledgehammer. The outrage from the de-escalation crowd is conspicuously absent because their narrative has been incinerated by the reality of Iranian aggression. For years, the realist school warned that the Iranian regime does not view the world through the lens of international law or humanitarian norms. They view it through the lens of survival and regional hegemony. They broke the ceasefire because they do not value the status quo. They value the disruption of the American-led order. But by doing so, they have triggered the very thing they feared most: a unified front of American hard power and regional necessity. The Arab states that were once cautious about their ties to Israel now find themselves in the same target crosshairs. Their survival now depends on the same American-made interceptors that protect Tel Aviv. Strategic depth is not just about miles of territory. It is about the ability to absorb a blow and return it with 10 times the force. Israel has demonstrated this depth through its layered defense systems, Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow 3. While the Iranian barrages are spectacular on social media, the kinetic reality is one of diminishing returns. Each intercepted missile is a multi-million-dollar failure for Tehran. The cost of this war is asymmetrical, and it favors the side with the deeper pockets and the more advanced foundries. The United States has the luxury of time and distance. Iran is trapped in its own geography, surrounded by enemies. It has just finished radicalizing against itself. The strategic pivot we are witnessing is the move toward total run-day, total deterrence. This means the end of the proportional response. In the realist framework, if your enemy uses a ceasefire to prepare a massacre, your only logical response is to remove their capacity to ever wage war again. The U.S. posture will now likely shift toward the destruction of the IRGC's economic and military nerve centers. The ports of Bandar Abbas, the refineries at Abadan, and the missile silos of the central desert are no longer off limits. They are now legitimate targets in a conflict that Iran has globalized. The American advantage is not just in the air or on the sea, it is in the total control of the escalation ladder. The U.S. can choose when, where, and how hard to hit. Iran, having fired its best shot, is now waiting for the sky to fall. Look at the consequences for the regional balance of power. This attack was meant to show Iranian strength, but it will ultimately reveal Iranian isolation. Russia is preoccupied in Ukraine and cannot afford to open a second front in the Middle East to save a partner. China is a consumer of energy, not a protector of it. They will not risk their fleet to defend Tehran's right to disrupt the oil flow. Iran stands alone, having alienated its neighbors and provoked the world's only true blue water navy. The geography of the Middle East is being rewritten by the contrails of interceptors and the impact craters of ballistic missiles. The final logic of this conflict is the logic of the end game. If the Iranian regime survives this, They will be a crippled power confined to their borders and stripped of their regional proxies. If they do not, we are looking at the most significant vacuum of power since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. But in either scenario, the United States remains the arbiter of the outcome. The sheer weight of American logistics, the ability to move thousands of tons of ordnance across oceans in days, ensures that any long-term war of attrition will end in Tehran's collapse. This is the reality of great power politics. It is cold, it is brutal, and it is decided by the side that can project the most power over the longest distance for the longest period of time. In the coming days, the world will see the full application of the Trump doctrine of strength. It is a doctrine that recognizes that in the Middle East, a ceasefire is often just a reload. The decision to hold off on strikes was a test of Tehran's intentions. Iran failed that test. By doing so, they have granted the United States the moral and strategic high ground to use its full kinetic library. The outrage from the advocates of restraint has been silenced by the sound of incoming missiles. There is no more room for debate. There is only the map, the sensors, and the inevitable application of overwhelming force. The regional consequences will be felt for generations. The Gulf states, once hesitant, will now move toward a permanent and overt security alliance with the U.S. and Israel. The peace that the diplomats dreamed of is dead, but a new, harder stability is being born in the fire of this escalation. It is a stability based on the undeniable reality that the Iranian regime is a clear and present danger to the global economy and regional survival. The balance of power is shifting back toward a centralized American-led architecture, not because of a desire for war, but because of the necessity of survival. As we watch the next phase of this conflict unfold, remember that war is not an emotional event. It is a structural one. Iran has tried to change the structure of the Middle East through Hua-Lurk firepower. But they have found that the structure is built on a foundation of American steel and Israeli innovation. The logistics of the U.S. military are already in motion. The tankers are in the air. The submarines are in position. The sensors are locked. The regime in Tehran thought they were starting a war to end the American era. Instead, they may have just provided the justification for its violent renewal. Strength is the only language that resonates in this theater. The Iranian leadership has spoken their piece with missiles. Now, the United States will respond with the full weight of its industrial and military machine. The map does not lie. The distances are clear. The power is lopsided. This is the end of the illusion of parity. This is the beginning of the correction. When the dust settles, the geography of the Middle East will look very different, and the seat of power will remain exactly where it has been for 80 years, in the hands of the nation that can control the seas, the skies, and the logic of destruction itself. Conclusion. The Middle East is no longer a theater of proxy wars. It is a theater of direct confrontation. Iran's gamble has failed the first test of realism. It has unified its enemies and exposed its own vulnerabilities. The world is about to see what happens when a superpower stops practicing diplomacy and starts practicing war. The escalatory ladder only has a few rungs left, and the United States is holding the top of it. Tehran is climbing into a trap of its own making. The aftermath of this night will not be measured in words, but in the permanent shift of the global balance of power. The era of strategic ambiguity is over. The era of hard power has returned with a vengeance.